Hey, I'm Jason Lapardis with Turkeys for Tomorrow.
And I'm Brett Collier with Louisiana State University, and today we're going to talk to you guys about managing wildlife populations.
Say, Brett, I just got some questions for you. There's a lot of folks out there that really want to know, what is the real turkey population across the U.S.? Do we have a real number? Wait.
Yeah.
Yes or no? Is this a guess?
So we have, in science, we've got guesses, and we've got what are called SWAGs. They're scientific wild ass guesses. We broadly know how many turkeys we've got in the United States. Right now, the estimates run somewhere between about 5 to 6 million birds, and that's across all the various subspecies that we've got. But there's a lot of variability year to year. In birds, depending on where you're at in the United States, how reproduction is and how harvest is. But generally speaking, we think we're right in around the 5 to 6 million number.
Okay, that's a good guesstimate.
Good estimate.
But I do have some questions because some of us have sat on a lot of different groups in the past and with state agencies. And what I've noticed is that every agency has a different means and method to determine what the population is. And so, do we need a little more consistency out there? What do you think could help from a national standpoint?
So, historically, most of the ways that state wildlife agencies, your regulatory agencies, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, where I'm from, keeps an eye on turkey populations is we monitor harvest on an annual basis. And we do basically what are called poult per hen counts, where we monitor recruitment based on how many hens we see, how many females we see, and how many poults they've got with them. Poult per hen counts are generally fairly standard across most of the United States. Most of the state agencies do something with that. Most state agencies monitor harvest. The general question comes in is how can we get from estimates of harvest to estimates of abundance? And that's roughly where we kind of have the problem, is that the method to expand harvest to abundance requires us to know how many individuals, at least for males, we take every year. That's called the harvest rate. And we don't have that kind of information for females because most states don't harvest females. They're not legally available for harvest, especially in the spring season. So
except for bearded hens.
Except for bearded hens in some cases. But we can generally come up with fairly okay estimates of male abundance. But it's more difficult to come up with estimates of total population abundance because it's difficult to estimate how many females we've got in the population.
No, I think that's great. A lot of people want to know what baseline populations are in any state and how do we address that. And, a common discussion point that comes up with me and many others is that by the time we see what harvest is, we're already 2 years behind. Right?
Yes.
Because most of your harvest, in a lot of places, 55% of your harvest is going to be 2-plus-year-old birds, right?
Correct.
So 2-year-old birds are the ones that like to do a lot of gobbling. They're that frisky teenager, that's out there like, woo, I got to find some ladies. And so that's when we have those exciting years. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, if we're, let's say, in a declining area, we're already 2 years behind the curve. Right. How do we get ahead of that?
It's for us to get ahead. So abundance estimation looks backwards. You have to have information from harvest generally to estimate where you were. What we do a lot of now, at least within the academic field, is we work on our modeling where we try and predict under a set of scenarios how much harvest we have, how much recruitment we have, to what abundance might be in the future. There's uncertainty associated with that, but by doing that, it allows regulatory agencies, your state agencies, to try and adjust regulations based on potential changes in recruitment 2 years earlier, potential changes in land management, for instance. Whether you've got a really, really bad event, currently there's some pretty bad fires in West Texas going on right now. That may cause the state agency to think differently about regulations in that particular region in a couple of years because we don't know what impact that could have on recruitment or survival for that matter. So modeling gives us the ability to do some kind of what-if scenarios and come up with a best educated guess on where we think population size will be. So it's kind of trying to meld a backward-looking approach and then a forward predictive approach together to try and come up with kind of the best available prediction for what abundance should be.
I think that's good. Let's hit on somebody else that we've chatted about in the last few days, but Dr. Mike Byrne, tell us a little bit about some of that research going on with him. It's very fascinating for you guys out there that may not know this, but through some artificial intelligence with drone technology, there's some methodologies going on where we're trying to figure out population numbers looking at roost. Tell us a little bit about that.
So for those of you who don't know, so I don't want to speak for Dr. Byrne at Missouri, but Dr.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, buddy. Dr. Michael Burns, a faculty member at the University of Missouri, and he's been doing some pretty groundbreaking work lately by combining the drone technology that's available with thermal imaging technology, so seeing stuff at night based on heat signatures, and flying the drones over these roost sites where turkeys are at, tag turkeys especially, and using that to estimate kind of a local abundance, because we know how many birds are roughly out there. We know what birds are tagged out there, so we know where they're at. And then what he can do is he can take their little drone with their little night vision camera on the bottom and go way up above, fly over it, and then they get a whole bunch of video. And then they run that video through, some sort of a neural network or an artificial intelligence, machine on the computer.
Programming,
much smarter stuff than me these days.
That.
and what it does is it picks out the heat signatures, and you can basically quickly aggregate up for large areas how many birds you've got out there. Now, the technology works really, really well in your kind of more semi-arid regions and in areas with deciduous trees, so trees that drop their leaves. Whenever you get into areas, especially like your southern pine forest where it's a little warmer, the technology doesn't work as well because the temperature difference between the birds and the trees are a lot closer together.
They heat up during the day and they retain that heat.
Yeah, so they can't quite tease it out. But anywhere up north and kind of out west, it seems like you could do a really, really good job of counting turkeys. I think the problem now is, if I'm not mistaken, is turkey vultures.
Turkey vultures,
because a turkey vulture and a turkey look about the same in the tree. And I know Mike has got some master's. I think it's a master's student that's working on trying to tease those two apart. So it'll be really exciting to see how that type of information when it comes out here in the next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're advancing so fast right now with some of the technology on how do we do population estimations. I think it's going to be very important. We've seen this with deer. I know I've been up in a helicopter running over everything you think of, including those pine forests, but it's pretty interesting with deer because they're so big, you can usually pick them up from above using the FLIR technology, and you can see them, and you can do a really good population estimation. A lot of the larger critters, but for turkeys, there's a little more work done, but I'm very excited about where this is going.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits, we always talk about engaging our the public in conservation actions, and what turkey hunters probably don't know is that by reporting their harvest on an annual basis to their state wildlife agency or through the app or whatever the tagging mechanism is, that actually is the data that the state agency uses to help set regulations and adjust regulations based on turkey population size. So turkey hunters as reporting their harvest, are actually citizen scientists in a way, because they're actually providing information that the states use for regulatory management of the species.
Absolutely, man. I'm glad you said that. This is really a call of action on behalf of Turkeys for Tomorrow. We really need everyone out there reporting this information. You said it very well, and we've been talking about it a ton this year, but you turkey hunters are our citizen scientists. You are the front lines, and you know exactly what's going on your property, on your lease, maybe where you're hunting, in whichever state you're in. And if we could use that information, it's going to help everyone at large, so we can kind of figure out what we need to do and to better manage these turkeys so that we don't have those silent springs. So, Brett, I know there's a lot of discussion in states right now. There's some states that's really changing their regulations and what they're doing because they're concerned about turkey harvest.
Yes.
And I think turkey harvest is a very important topic when we start talking about two types of mortality. Okay?
Yes.
Mortality sounds bad, but let's break this down. So in the science arena, we have two types of mortality. We basically have compensatory mortality and additive mortality. So tell me a little bit about the difference between those two.
So additive mortality is exactly what it sounds like. So and whenever we're really talking about compensatory or additive mortality, we're talking about harvest and what potential impacts it has. So additive mortality is mortality that's added to natural mortality due to harvest. And turkeys, generally speaking, harvest of turkeys is additive. We've done a bunch of work in the United States over a lot of years. We've just recently, Dr. Patrick Whiteman, who's at the University of Georgia, just published probably what's the seminal paper on turkey harvest in the United States, using data from about 7 or 8 different states. And pretty much turkey harvest is additive. And what that means is we lose about, let's say, 13 to 15% of birds, male birds, every year to predation, get hit by a car. Very few get poached, but they do get poached, disease, that sort of thing. And then if that was all we lost, then about 85-ish% of those birds would be around next year, okay? Your 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and whatever. But we shoot about 30% of our birds a year. So the harvest rate's around 30%. That 30% is in addition to what we lose from predation. So it's additive mortality. If we didn't harvest those birds, most of them would be recruited into the next year.
Absolutely.
Compensatory mortality is a little bit different, okay? Under the same situation, not all of those birds that were harvested would be harvested, but more of them would die for predation. More of them would die from disease. So compensatory mortality basically means that some of those individuals are being compensated for by other mortality sources.
That's right.
Turkeys, for the most part, across the United States are harvest is additive. So whatever we shoot would more likely than not, if we hadn't shot it, lived until the next year. Notwithstanding maybe an occasional extra bird that dies of predation or that kind of stuff. So it's pretty clear for us. So when states are setting harvest regulations and setting things, how many individuals can be harvested, setting bag limits, setting timing of seasons, they're setting it with the mind that harvest is additive on the landscape. And they have to take that into account whenever they're working on regulations, because they want to be sure that we're providing enough opportunity to the citizens of their states, while also ensuring the resource will be sustainable year over year.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's good. And something else we also want to talk about, along with mortality and the different types, but maybe things that actually cause it as well.
Sure.
And so sometimes, we're looking at average harvest numbers in a state, for example. And it may shake out because we're looking at average number of hunters and average number of birds. Let's say it's a multiple bird state. And so you may have a 1.2 birds harvested per person, which doesn't work out right. I don't just get a foot or a feather or something like that. But when we think about that, we oftentimes don't think about what pressure does to birds. And I know there's been some research done that shows that the additional pressure, and I tell this to a lot of folks just to make it as simple as possible, but putting pressure on birds multiple times, males.
Yes.
Males and people like me, because I like to hunt. I've been known to chase birds in a few states.
A few days, yeah.
Yeah. And so what happens is maybe in a multiple bird state, or maybe we're just constantly putting pressure on birds and bumping birds, so to speak. Oftentimes, from what I've understood from some of the research, these birds will completely leave their home range.
Yes.
So the best way I can put this is when a bird leaves its home range, it's like picking up you or I, and we're going to get bumped out of our home range. We're going to be dropped in a foreign country and probably under rapid fire. And we're going to be sitting there, and we may know what to do, but the likelihood of survival goes way down.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of really good work on turkey response to hunters, and it's gone on for years and years, and I'll be honest, I think we've got it tamped down pretty good. Some of the most recent stuff was by Elena Roth. She was a graduate student of mine at LSU. She's actually with Wisconsin DNR now, and she's a biologist up in Wisconsin, living her best life.
Hey, I love cheese curds in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and she is a turkey hunter, and she is great. And she looked at how turkeys responded to hunters on the Webb Center WMA complex in South Carolina. It was really, really cool, because every morning, Elena, for her, and this is when I'm glad to be the professor and not the student, she'd have to get up at like 3:30 in the morning and go wait at the entrance to the WMA and convince turkey hunters to carry a GPS unit with them. on their hunts so that we could see where they would go on the landscape. All right. And a lot of the turkey hunters were like, I don't want to carry one of those. I want you to know where I'm hunting.
A beer or what you have to do?
We told them if they shot a bird, we give them the map of the bird that they shot because we got a bunch of tagged birds out there.
I got you.
And what she was able to do was collect information on about 1,500 turkey hunters over about 5 years. And that's a lot of people. That's a lot
1,500?
of turkey hunters. Like
that's
us.
A ton
it's
of people.
A ton of taking a point every minute on these guys and girls, okay? Strapping this GPS unit. And then we also had turkeys, both male and female, with GPS tags out on the WMA. So we could see how the turkeys and the turkey hunters responded to each other. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what was really interesting about this was, as you would expect, right? And you know, I might not be the turkey hunter that you are, but as you would expect,
I agree.
As soon as the turkey hunters got out there on the landscape, the male turkeys immediately displaced from where they were at before turkey season started. They moved farther back in the woods, as far away from roads as they could possibly get.
Tips, guys,
as far away from the roads as they could possibly get, and they kept going if necessary. But it was just the males. The females didn't move at all. They were like, okay, we're just going to kind of hang out here where we've always been because they knew that they weren't at risk. But what was interesting was, and here's another tip, after the first couple of weeks, the males started to move back to where they were originally.
Slowly immigrating back.
Slowly coming back home. So what happened was they got displaced really quick. Some of them would, you know, in this particular case, some of them would go way back in the WMA. Some of them would cross the river. Some of them would maybe dump onto private lands nearby. Go to an island. And not all of them left the WMA, and quite a few of them were harvested, right? But the general trend was they would leave. And then about 2 weeks, they started to work their way back.
Trickle effect
back in. And what's interesting about that is that those birds became available for harvest on the WMA again later in the season when actually there wasn't as much effort going on the WMA. So as hunter effort declined, the birds started trickling back to where they were. So we're pretty confident that we've kind of tamped down what's going on with how turkeys respond to hunters. There's an immediate acute effect where they get bumped, and in any manner, a lot of people out there, they have a bad experience with a hunter or whatever, and they scoot off, and then it just takes some time to get back to kind of into their core range again.
Hey, so this is a great segue to talk about silent birds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great segue to that. And so I think there's some learned behaviors going on over time that's really highly influencing how we hunt birds and what birds want to do each day. And just kind of curious what the thoughts are on these silent birds that maybe they've heard a call or two or been exposed to a shotgun or to a person and said, hey, I know I don't need to respond to that again. And all of a sudden, we get birds that go quiet. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the science on that's it's a little tricky because it's really hard to ID that a bird's actually being silent. We kind of assume it based on where they're at. But I'm not going to out any WMAs here because I don't want anybody to suddenly go to a particular place on a WMA.
Don't mention it. Could be one of my spots.
Yeah, it could be one of your spots.
Don't do that.
We have study sites where we know for a fact that males never leave a couple of 100 yards from active roads, and they live, and they never get harvested, and they never get shot, and they're there every single year.
Road birds.
We've got a lot of them that we know about. And what's interesting about them is that they're in areas that are heavily hunted, and if they were making noise, we think they'd probably get pursued a lot more actively. But we think they don't make noise. So one of the things, and I can't take credit for this one, my good friend Mike at University of Georgia has actually this year put a GPS tag on a bird that can actually monitor how frequently and when it's gobbling during the day. It's got a little
really
auditory tag on it, right? And no data on it yet, can't make any statements on it, but I think what
Mike, you got to work with us.
Yeah, it'll be really cool. And what I think it'll be able to help us fine tune when males are gobbling, how frequently individual males are gobbling, and where they're gobbling. Because it could be that they're gobbling actively, say, away from disturbance, but as they approach areas where they're regularly disturbed, they go quiet. You know, a learned behavior, which we expect. And it could be that some of them are just like people. Some people are quieter than I've never had a problem being loud. So
really?
yeah, not at all. I'm very, I don't like to talk to anybody. But some people are quieter and some people are more vocal. And it may be that birds have I don't want to call it a personality, but maybe they have
It's almost like it is. It's
they have a
almost
personality.
cultural within
Yes.
the birds themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see that. But what we do know, is that dead birds don't gobble.
That's right.
So whenever we look at gobbling data across the United States, and kind of when it ramps up, and when we see the peaks, and there's several papers that have been published on this lately, on public lands where there's lots and lots of active hunting, you see big turnovers in gobbling activity as the hunting season progresses, and that's because we're removing actively gobbling birds. They're coming off the landscape.
They're the ones that are asking to be shot.
Yeah, they're getting harvested, right? But on some of our study sites that don't have hunting, gobbling is almost continuous throughout the reproductive season. But the reproductive season is a little bit shorter because there's just more
But you're
birds
still
out there.
having peaks.
But
peaks and
not
troughs.
as much as you would think. It's actually really quite flat.
Really?
It's like almost, I say flat, like almost like just one
It's a
big normal
small
curve. Yeah,
little-
it's not the big peak which
Yep.
you see on a public piece of property, because you get a whole bunch of gobbling and then the birds are harvested and it goes away.
And then it goes back up
It's
again.
much smoother than that. So it's interesting to think about the dynamic between hunters and gobbling activity, and how there's a time aspect there, in that as we remove actively gobbling birds from the landscape, the active gobbling is by definition going to decline.
Absolutely.
And using that, the state agencies thinking about that whenever they're doing regulatory actions.
Right.
Because they want to be sure that hunters, as we all know, and anybody who's ever done a hunter survey before, what hunters want to have is, turkey hunters especially, they want to hear birds gobbling and they want to know there's opportunity. We're not bloodthirsty in that we don't just always want to kill a bird. So you ask, every hunter survey of turkey hunters has said, we want to hear birds,
Yes.
and we want to have opportunity. So she's shaking her head over there. She must not like what I'm saying. We want to hear birds and we want to have opportunity. So if we hear birds and have opportunity, we're happy. If we're harvesting, and as we're harvesting these birds, the hearing of them goes down. So states think about that from their regulatory perspective.
All right, so there's more than just hearing them. I'm an avid turkey hunter. I need to hear the bird, but then I need to see it in display for me as well. And then I need to hear it again when it's really close to me drumming. And when I get all of that, then I'm a very happy hunter. Now, I don't necessarily have to pull the trigger, but if I get all that, I am just like, whew, I'm done. I've had a good day.
And I would agree with that. But,
Right.
I'm just saying that all the data that the states and the feds collect on this opportunity and hearing stuff is really what it's at. And if you think about it, that's really what we're out there for.
Absolutely.
It's not about pulling the trigger. It's about hearing those birds gobbling
experience.
up and down the tree line and that kind of stuff. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, 6 or 7 birds gobbling makes a good morning. Or afternoon.
Or afternoon.
Hey, one more thing. We're talking about gobbling, and I just had a question just the other day. We're talking about it. It's pretty fascinating, but birds have a different sound almost anywhere you go. Kind of like me, you got a little bit of hillbilly South in me, and I don't know what your language is, but it's a little different. But we
Yeah.
all sound, even though we may look a little similar, but we have a different sound.
Yep.
And we think about birds gobbling out west, like a Merriam's or a Rio, and they got that blah, 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 as opposed to that kind of deep guttural Eastern or an Osceola. And so we had a question just the other day come to us, and we're like, hey, why do these birds sound so different? Is it speciation, or what do you think?
Yeah, so being honest, we don't know. Okay, now hang on.
Okay.
So what they sound like doesn't affect how we manage them, right? It doesn't affect how states, manage regulations. It doesn't
Right.
affect how the states and the feds put habitat on the ground, okay? So from a science perspective, we don't spend a ton of time wondering about the different vocalization styles. That said, as a scientist, I think logically, I would suggest that it's no different than having just a little bit of a different dialect like we would see in humans.
Absolutely.
We know that songbirds have different songs based on where they're,
Where they're
little
located.
passerines, where they're raised at, but they all can interbreed. They all understand each other, and I think that's how it is with turkeys. is that, we're all, someone from, South Louisiana, someone from, South Georgia, someone from Appalachia sounds different from someone in the upper Midwest, or up in Boston, so I think that it's, and maybe not all the words make sense, but that's a Louisiana problem. But I think that it's a question of, they just sound a little bit different because of, I don't know if you want to call it evolution, but of where they've been their entire time. And it doesn't negate the ability for them to understand each other.
Right.
But it's just like a little local nuance, I think, is what it is.
Absolutely.
So that's my, and that's admittedly a guess because we really don't know, but that's what I think would be a pretty educated guess.
No, I think that's good. It's been a common question recently and lately with us.
Right.
A lot of people just wondering, like, man, why do these birds gobble so much or have a different sound? And I think that's important for folks to know as they're traveling and getting to see places and getting to enjoy these different birds in different states.
Yeah, and I hope with all the work that's being done across the United States collecting auditory data, there's a lot of people who are collecting sound recordings every day to specifically look at gobbling, that down the road, I suspect at some point someone will aggregate all that information together and come up with maybe regional, I think big regions,
Absolutely.
right? Like regional boundaries for what sound, what a gobble should sound like. We do have that for passerines, right? We do that for a lot of the little birds that they can catch and put them into cages and evaluate their different song types, which is fine, right?
Yeah.
We're just a little bit behind because it doesn't do a lot for us for management, but I expect that's coming down the pipe pretty soon.
That's great. Well, if you want more information on anything we're talking about, please come online, check our website out, turkishfortomorrow.org. You can definitely find some information on research. And I know you can connect with Brett because he has a plethora of information through LSU.
Yep, and you can find me online I'm at Dr. Short Spur on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all that jazz. And as a state employee, you can Google me at LSU and my email address will come up and you can shoot me an email.